All right, everyone. Now, in this portion of our lecture, we're going to talk about a couple of things. All right. We're going to be talking about primarily structured output, making sure that when we receive an output from Gemini, it's always structured in the same way. We're also going to talk about starting a chat and manually handling a conversation context between two individuals and opening up that chat. Um, And we're going to talk about how exactly it is that we're going to handle something like multimodal capabilities. Let's say we provide an image as well as excuse me, as a textual prompt to Gemini, how we could actually do that. And then finally, we'll go into the concept of thinking. We're going to leave multimodal towards the end because there's a good chance that with everything we're going to cover, we won't be able to make it there in time. But we'll see how this goes. So we're going to start off with structured output. Now, what does that mean? Structured output. As of right now, Gemini is just returning a response, and that response just shows up as response.text. Right? That's what we're currently getting back. And this works great for my current iteration. But what if this block of code or the response from Gemini was going to be fed into a separate portion of my code base? For example, my front end, right? Well, we're going to quickly build a separate example here. We're going to call this the class of movie review. That is going to be an API. This is going to take a post. We're going to look for movie title here. And we're going to go ahead and send a request to Gemini again. So I have to specify that I have my client, which is equal to Gemini client, where I'm going to be asking for an API key. You can see that's coming in from there. All right, so there's everything's a little bit similar to what we've seen up above, except that I'm not including that exception handling. But there we have our client. And let me make sure that's actually exactly the same. It is perfect. Now that I have my client, I need my response to come back for my user. I just want something like a movie review. So I'm going to go ahead and take this prompt straight from our curriculum so that we don't spend too much time writing it out. I'm going to build my configuration. So we'll call it Gemini config, where I want to state the model that I will be speaking to. In this case, the model that I will be speaking to will be Gemini 2.5 Flash. This is actually a model. Perfect. And then I want to specify the content. So you can see use an F string there. Let me go ahead and try to remove some of this. All right. So my F string is going to take in as follows. It's going to say, you are a film critic. When given a movie description, return a structured review. And I could actually give it the movie description here. When given a movie description, I'm going to change this to movie title and say return a structured review. All right, so here's my data, movie title, and so on. All right, you need to go to sleep because you're getting in the way. All right, then we can actually return a response from Gemini. So we'll go into response is equal to client dot models dot generate content, where we're going to pass in our Gemini config yet again. And I just simply want to see the response. So we're just going to go ahead and return a response of Gemini. And Gemini is going to send back response.text. All right, so nothing too crazy here. Let's make sure that my server is actually still running. Great. This actually isn't tied to any sort of URL pattern, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to add a path. We'll call this the movie endpoint, and it's going to go to my movie review as view. All right, let's go ahead and come over to movie. You can see that the method of get is not allowed, but I can pass in a movie here. And I believe what we're looking for here is movie title. So let's go ahead and create that. We make our movie title. And in this case, let's pass Ice Age. I'm just going to copy that and paste that right here. Okay, so there's Ice Age. I'm going to wait for my server to be done. I'm going to send my request, and let's see what comes back. I think it's still thinking. There you go. All right, so here's Ice Age. All right, we can see a description coming back from Gemini. It talks to me through the director, Carlos, Blue Sky, and it goes into a very extensive review of Ice Age. All right. Now, at this point, this works. But maybe there's specific attributes that I want it to return so that I could immediately feed it into either some sort of React project or I can feed it into something inside of my models. So how do I structure this to work correctly for me? Well, for structured outputs, we can actually provide a configuration where we can specify something similar to a Django model. For example, I can state, hey, here's my class of movie review model that is going to take in something like models.model. And we can quickly go ahead and say from Django.db, I want to import models. All right, and here I can go ahead and specify that I want to grab the title of something. I want to make sure that I have the sentiment of something. Maybe I want to make sure that I have the summary of this class, and I want to make sure that I have the score. Now, scores could be something as simple as models.integer field. Summary could be something like models.text field. Sentiment could be something like a character field, and I could define options here if I wanted to. And then title would be also a character field. All right, so this could essentially be the model that I want to be filling into. Well, how do I turn this model into something that Gemini can possibly accept? URLs, movie review model doesn't declare an explicit app label and isn't an application installed apps. Yeah, that's okay. All right. So we're going to convert this model into something that Gemini can work with. And the way we do this is simply by utilizing something called Pydantic. Right? Models aren't unique to Django. Pydantic essentially allows us to make similar models that reflect Django ORM in Python code, but utilizing something called base model, along with a description. So first of all, we need to install Pydantic. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Why use Pydantic? Here's my installation, and here's how to install through pip. Let me go ahead and kill this server here. I'm going to be installing Pydantic through pip, and then I'm going to run my server. There's my server running. Well, now I can state, hey, from Pydantic, I want to import base model. And that will allow me to work with this base model. From here, I can also import something called field. And if we take a look at our Pydantic examples that are happening here, we can describe different model fields that come from Pydantic. This field type. me see if I can find it here. So we can describe things like positive integer. There's also validators that we can grab from Pydantic. We're not going to go too in depth into how Pydantic works. Just know that it pretty much holds the same capabilities as Django ORM. Now let's start writing our class. Well, instead of models, what I'm going to utilize is this base model from Pydantic. When I call this string value, I'm going to specify that, hey, this is actually going to utilize the type of string. And when I set it to a value, the way that I set it to a value won't be to something like models.charField. I'm going to specify that this is a field, where this field holds a description stating that this should be the title of the movie being reviewed. Sentiment pretty much follows the same exact convention. We're looking for string, which is of a field type. This field should have a description. And what we're looking for here is the overall sentiment of the movie. And we can go ahead and specify a couple of things here. For example, I mentioned that this could be an options field. Well, when I break it out to the sentiment of the movie, I could also explain that it must be one of the following. Let's go ahead and do that here. We're going to go ahead and say must be one of the following. I can explain that it could be something like positive, negative, or neutral. Apparently, I don't know how to spell negative. It's very important that I watch my spelling, especially when talking to a large language model. All right, for summary, this is also going to be a string. But maybe for the summary, I can explain some other things here. All right, I could say something like, hey, this summary holds a description of should be or should not be any longer than 200 words. And then finally, we can go into the score, where the score could be an integer field. And I can explain that it should or must be a number ranging from 0 to 10, where 0 is the minimum or the minimal value, and 10 is the maximum value. All right, so there I'm explaining some constraints. I have my upper and lower lateral limits, and I've now created a model that I can utilize within my request. Does anyone have any questions over how we created this Pydantic model? Okay, if no one has any questions, let's start talking about how we can include these questions here. We're going to set up our configuration a little bit differently now. We still have our movie review. So you are a film critic. When given a movie title, return a structured review. Now, this here is more to the system than it is to the prompt. So I'm going to actually take it out. I'm going to put it here for now. All right, the content should be the prompt that comes in from the user. So in this case, my prompt or my content is just data. my user input. But now we're going to add a new field here called config. Now this field takes a special type of class, which comes in from Gen AI types. We're going to grab something called generate content config. Now this generate content config takes in system instructions. My system instruction is the following. All right. So you are a film critic. When given a movie title, return a structured review. So this way, all I have to pass in is the movie title through contents. All right. Now I can also tell it which way is it that I want this response to come in, or what data type am I looking for? This is called a response MIME type. And the typical thing that we work with is application JSON. We should be familiar with this portion here from whenever we wrote test for Jenga. We're going to gather application JSON. And then when we want the schema to be consistent, well, I can add a response schema where my response schema would be of my movie review model. I don't have to initiate it. I don't have to send anything. Now, when I send this request, I should get back an object. Well, how do I view this object? I'm actually going to need to grab JSON so that I could utilize it. And now when I call my request, all I need to do is do JSON.loads response.text, because the text inside of my response is going to come back as an application JSON object. All right. Again, my request is going to come in. I have my movie title. My configuration has changed now. I'm still using the same model. The content is the data that's coming in from the user. But here's the consistent instruction that I'm going to be passing to my model. All right, the consistent instruction is, for example, in here, we had content where we had all of these constraints and everything. Our system instruction would have ended here. Right, this is where we define all of the role and everything that our system needs to accomplish. The changing variable or the changing content is the user input. From there, we want to specify the response MIME type, which we said was application JSON. And then finally, the consistent object structure in which our response should come back. In this case, we're giving it a pydantic model of movie review. Let's try this request one more time. Gonna take my title. Here you go. And I'm gonna send my request. It's gonna take a while to think. And now I have a much better structured review. So from Gemini, I got an object. That object holds a title, sentiment, summary, and score. You can see the score is 8. It has a positive sentiment. Those are the options that I gave it. In Ice Age, introduce a memorable prehistoric world. All right, I'm not going to read all of this to all of us, right? But we can see that our structured output worked. Let's try a different movie title. Does anyone have a movie they want to see a review for? No, you guys are just going to leave me hanging like that? That's okay.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Let's
Best movie known to mankind.
everything, everywhere, all at once. Like that?
Yeah, it's a pretty tough one, actually. Now that I think about it.
All right, let's try it out. Let's see what it does. We're giving it a movie title. It actually does hold a 10 score, comes back with a positive. So everything everywhere all at one is a dazzling maximalist masterpiece. All right. We can see here it goes into business, marriage, relationship with her daughter. I think I tried watching this movie and I just got completely lost. So yeah, nice. Let's see, another movie where I got completely lost, or where most people get completely lost. Oh man, I forgot the name of the movie. It's Interstellar. There you go.
I was gonna say Inception.
Inception works too. Yeah, let's do that one. Let's do Inception. All right, so we send Inception. It's gonna take some time to think. There you go. It still got positive. They didn't do as well as Everything Everywhere All at Once, but we can see that we're getting back some pretty consistent reviews. This is something that I can easily feed into my React application, right? And my React application can grab all of this and just make a card or some sort of summary. I can also feed it into a Django model or a serializer as the data component and be able to create an entry into my database. So now my structured output is working great. We've seen some use cases for it, or we've talked about some use cases for it. And there wasn't really too much extra code that we needed to add. We just simply needed to configure or generate content config. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions over how we can ensure that we have a structured output?
Can you explain again what Pydantic is? It's just taking our class and making it something that Gemini can read?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Pydantic gives us a way to structure models the same way that Django ORM models allow us to interact with a database. When we want to specify some sort of schema, we do it through the concept of model. And Pydantic is what gives us access to base model, right? And this way we can define something like a schema, which is essentially just a data table.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Because Gemini is looking for a schema, not a class.
that's right. It's looking for a schema.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Okay. If no one has any questions, let's go ahead and upgrade our LLM class for our Python reviewer. And instead of having this just generate content, I'm actually going to change this to handle a chat. Right? This is where I'm going to be starting a chat with my session. Now, what's the difference between a chat and generate content? Can anybody tell me what the difference would be? And I brought up this drawing for a reason.
Word.
I mean, is a
The
chat,
oh, you can do it. Do it.
is a chat like way more iterative, like generate content, it kind of like predetermines, whereas a chat is like a true back and forth.
Yeah, awesome. So there's one point, right? A chat is a true back and forth, like there's an actual conversation going on. Whereas generate content is just you give me some information once, I give you a response, we're done talking, right? And here is where we really need to emphasize the concept of context. Generate content will only keep track of context once, which is the first time I send the request. All right, so I say, hey, Gemini, can we talk? Yes, we can talk. Who are you? I am so and so. This is my question. Here's my response. And the context gets dumped. It's gone, never to be seen again. Now, chat works differently. In the concept of chat, a request gets sent, it gets sent back. All right, here's my response. And it gets held at the views logic, or it gets held within that class of client. The next time I want to go ahead and send a chat, well, it's already keeping track of the context along with that same user. Now, ideally, this context should be isolated to the user, not to your token. There is a way to do this. We don't have enough time to dive into making the whole user and connecting different tokens, but please make sure you keep that in mind. Context should be isolated to the user, not just the independent chat. All right. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and start this conversation loop. And for this one, actually, I think it's going to be much better if we do this in a separate Python script rather than having it inside of a server, since the server may add a bit of more complexity that we don't necessarily need right now. So I'm going to make a file. This file, I'm going to call it my chat.py. And I'm going to open up chat.py. Okay, so for chat.py, I know there's a couple of things that I need here. For example, I am going to need to say that from Gen AI. Oh, man, what am I missing here? Oh, it's from Google. That will do it. From Google, I need to import Gen AI. I know that I'm going to need to import JSON from .env. We're going to need to import load.env. And then finally, I should need to import OS. All right, let's go and put these into action. I'm going to load the environment variable here from .env. I'm going to make my chat instance. So let's call this chat instance. Where for my chat instance, actually, let's start off with our client. I apologize. So my client is going to take in an API key. Which is going to come in from environment. Okay. Now I want to actually create a chat instance. When I create this chat instance, it's as follows. I can have my client dot chats dot create. Very similar to my generate content functionality. It's just that now I'm utilizing a chat and I'm creating a chat. I can specify what model I want to speak to. In this case, it's going to be, I'm just going to use the same model. So let me go ahead and grab it from over here. There you go. Gemini. Oh, I did not want Flash. That's what I get for tabbing in. Let's see. Oh, no, I do want Flash. I did want Flash. I lied. I apologize. All right, so there you go. I have my Gemini 2.5. And then I could generate some content configuration again, right? I could actually have some configuration where I can specify, hey, from Gen AI, or excuse me, I'm doing this wrong. Syntax is important. From Gen AI dot types. I'll probably want a comma there. I want to generate content configuration, where my generate content configuration could have something like applicate, or what was it again? It was, let's take all these. Boom. We don't necessarily need this portion for response schema. And we're going to change the system instruction here shortly. Now, again, the whole purpose of this is to have a reviewer, right? So I'm actually going to pass in this prompt here as my system instruction. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to go to my chat, specify system instruction. Okay, there's my system instruction now. I have my information coming back as application JSON, and the content is constantly going to be provided through my actual interaction in this chat. All right. Well, let's put it to test now. let's say while true, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a user input. This user input is going to take in an input field. Maybe we put, how can I assist? Do \n, and we tab it in. All right. Well, now we just go ahead and communicate with our Gemini instance. I'm going to state, hey, if user input is present, then I'm going to go ahead and send my request here. So I'm going to do response is equal to my chat instance dot send message, where I'm going to include my user input. And actually, you can do something like this. Okay, we send back our response comes in, and then we could just print my assistant said the following. And then we could just include, let's turn this into an F string. Let's do JSON.loads and do the response.text. We actually don't need any sort of JSON.loads here. We could provide a schema if we want to make this fancy. We should have enough time to make it a little bit fancy. Why not? Let's go from Pydantic. Let's import base model. And let's go ahead and import field. I want to make a class for my response. So I'm going to do class tutor response, which should take in a base model. This response should be something like question, which is a string, should be a field where the description is a concise explanation of the question that was asked. We should have something like, oh, you know what? Let's leave this for after we try this out. Let's try it out first. I'm going to run this chat.py. So it's telling me, how can I assist you? Which is the same experiment that we did early. So how can I make a Lambda function that takes in two parameters, or excuse me, two arguments instead of one? We send this to the API. We wait for it to respond. And here's what my chat comes back with. So how can I make a Lambda function that takes in two arguments instead of one? What I got was from the assistant. So it's giving me already a JSON portion, right? So the explanation is Lambda functions can take multiple arguments by separating them with commas, just like regular function definitions. The code example, which holds a description. So this Lambda function takes two arguments, etc., etc. The Python code, and that's all already being provided to me along with some output. Now I'm assuming this is happening because of JSON.loads, but let's go ahead and try to send something similar. Let's say, how do I define a function in Python? All right, so when this is sent, this actually gives me an error. This is happening because of that JSON.loads. It's not able to read it every single time because there's no consistency as to how this should come back. So now I can go ahead and define that consistency. So field, here we can do the answer, which is a string. We can do a field description. answer to question in plain English. We could do a code example, which should be defined as a string. This is a field with a description stating code. And actually, this should be a string or none. So code example demonstrating the answer to question or none if not applicable. All right, we send our request and I never put it inside of my chat, which is important. Probably want to fix that really quick. Let's do our response schema where we can pass in our tutor response. Now we can run it. So how can I assist? Let's see. How do I define a function in Python? Okay, so here's the assistant. The question is, how do I define a function in Python? You define a function utilizing this, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, what if I want my function to take in multiple arguments? Because that wasn't covered there. Okay, so what if I want my function to take in multiple arguments? Okay, so how to define a function with multiple arguments? The answer is to define the function. Okay, let's see. What questions have I asked up to this point? Okay, so what questions have I asked up to this point? Question, what questions have I asked up to this point? Answer, you have asked about how to define a function in Python and how to define a function that takes in multiple arguments. Code example, none, because there's nothing to show me in code, right? So now I'm actually able to maintain a conversation state. That context is being saved. There's some sort of memory allocation to everything that I'm talking about with Gemini's model. And I'm getting all of my responses back in a structured format that I can always ensure works correctly or feed it to some other code. Right now, this part's kind of important, especially because if for us as programmers, we usually always want to feed this response to other code. Even if we're just trying to display the message, we would have to feed it to our React application. So our React application needs to have some sort of structure to be able to grab code and demonstrate it. Does anyone have any questions over how we maintain this chat state here? Okay, if no one has any questions, let's go into our concept of thinking. Now, thinking is a pretty simple implementation. Luckily, it's not anything that we need to worry about adding that's too hard. Thinking is as simple as stating, hey, I want to tell you what your thinking configuration will be. And here from Gen AI, we have types where we can grab a thinking configuration. And this thinking configuration just takes a thinking budget. Now, thinking budget is pretty much a significance, or thinking overall pretty much states how hard is it that how much effort is it that we want to spend into our model. If I want my model to conduct very high effort, a lot of thinking before it's actually able to generate a response, then I can place my budget as high. I am telling you, expend plenty, if not a lot of resources to ensure that I get back a good response. Something for like code generation, this is very good for. If you're dealing with anything that's extremely important and that you need to make sure that the AI is dealing the best analytics that it can possibly give you, then always place it as high. If you're dealing with something that's more general purpose, like, oh, okay, well, I'm just asking for general knowledge, put it as medium. That's not really that much information that we need, right? For something like a code tutor that we're currently building, I would also have it as medium. If it's something that's dedicated to a simple question answer statement, like there's not going to be any sort of conversation state, or the data isn't necessarily very complex, it's just a simple, hey, what's the weather going to be like today? I would just put it as low. It's really not going to need much computing power for something like that. And actually, that's a terrible example. The what's the weather going to be like today? Maybe something where we're telling it, let's see here, where it wouldn't need too much information. If we're providing ourselves an example and then telling it to compile the code, it would probably be something low. We don't need it to identify any bugs. We just need it to actually run the code and tell us what the outcome would be. I would put that as low. And then, of course, there is minimal, which is no thinking power whatsoever. I'm just going to go ahead and run this. So let's try this out with a couple of different statements here. Oh, let's see what's going on here. One validation error for thinking config, thinking budget. Input should be a valid integer, unable to parse string type integer parsing. Interesting. Let's take a look here. Let's go into Gemini, dive into thinking. There's a good chance there's a mistake here. Okay, so if I want to specify thinking, okay, that's not it. Thinking configuration. Oh, we can actually include the dots as well, which is pretty cool. So that we could see that. Why not? Let's add that in there. Let's do thinking, or excuse me, dot. Include dots. Let's do true there. All right. If I continue going on here, that's include thoughts, controlling thinking. Nope. Yeah, those are the different thinking levels. Oh, it's thinking level, not thinking budget. I apologize there. So let's go ahead and do thinking level. All right. Now let's go ahead and try to run this. We have our chat. Right now I have it as minimal. How can I define a function that takes in multiple arguments? We send that. That actually ended up breaking it. And I think that has to do with my configuration style. Let's see here. Deny errors, client errors, invalid argument. What is going on? Okay, I'm glad we left multimodal towards the end. Oh, I might have ran out of usage with Gemini, which hopefully I didn't. Let's see here. Oh, I see. So it's not telling me. I don't think this minimal is supported. Let me try low instead. I'm pretty sure this is the issue. Oh, I just ran into a bunch of errors here. Okay, so how do I define a function? And make sure that this gets copied so I don't have to keep writing it over and over again. Okay, so I'm getting a couple of errors here. Code message thinking level is not supported by this model. Okay, there it is the issue. So the issue is the model that I'm currently utilizing. I'm trying to assign a thinking level, and the model of 2.5 does not support that. It looks like that's only a 3 model. So let's try that out. Let's try to move to Gemini 3.1 Flash. Why not? Let's see, all models. Let's go to 3.1 Flash. Okay, I get that it's in preview mode, but it should still work. Let's try this out. If this portion doesn't work after this, then we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so how do I define a function? Now it's actually thinking. Great. I gave it a thinking level of low. It looks like it didn't like this. Let's see. This model is currently experiencing high demand. Spikes in demands are usually temporary. Please try again later. All right. So we're running into some Gemini issues at this point, which is totally okay. It's not necessarily an issue for us. We could just take off this thinking level, go back to 2.5 Flash. Let's see here. There you go. We'll take off this thinking level, leave the include dots. We can run our chat. How do I define a function? And now we actually get our portion, right? So here's from our assistant, everything that's coming back. Hello name, calling the function. How can I assist? We're not necessarily seeing everything that's coming back there, but we can actually view the thinking portion. Let's see here. Let me go back into the documentation, come down into thinking. So thinking, we have thoughts. Whenever I do include thoughts, here we go. We can see it in response.candidate0.content parts. We could steal this and try to iterate through to actually view the thoughts. Why not? Let's try this out. Okay, now it's going through. We'll see everything that comes back. So here's my assistant answers. Or excuse me, here's the answer. Okay, here we go. All right, so how do I define? So here's the thought summary, everything that's coming in. So define a function in Python. There's other users hitting me with a fundamental Python question. How do I define a function? They're likely beyond handholding, so let's get this assisted. I need to explain. So that's its entire thought process. Here's the answer that it was able to generate. And once it has that answer, here's the response that it's able to return to you. And then it asks you how you can assist. So this thought process becomes very useful in case you want to change your prompt or you need to update your prompt to be more specific. Knowing the thought process that the LLM went through to be able to generate a response will give you the capability to update your prompt. All right, and that's thinking. Took a little longer than I expected, but we got through it. Does anyone have any questions regarding thinking or chat? Okay, doesn't seem like we have any questions. Now, with that said, we're going to go ahead and finish off by handling multimodal request. I'm not going to put this inside of an entire Python server because we are running out of time. So I'm just going to do this multimodal script. The concept of multimodal essentially means that we're going to be working with multiple modals. I'm going to take all these import statements. I'm actually going to take all of this here. All right. So in this multimodal, we're actually going to pass in a picture and request a description of it. So first of all, I already have my client loaded. Now I need my picture. So I can state that my picture is equal to, and in here, I'm not going to utilize OS to be able to grab my picture. I'm actually going to ask for the path to this OS. So I'm going to say the image picture path is going to be equal to, and I'm going to specify the path to the picture. You need to go away. All right. So within this directory, there is an LLM project directory. In the LLM project directory, there is a media directory, an images directory, and then a Pikachu.png. This is what I want to work with. Now I can actually start going forward and building my request. So I'm going to state with open. I want to actually open this file. The file that I want to open will be my picture path. This will be in read. And the B is because this is a complex file, not just a text file. I'm going to grab my image bytes, which is equal to f.read. All right, those image bytes is what I'm actually going to send into Python, or excuse me, into Gemini. I'm going to go ahead and build my response, which is equal to my client dot models dot generate content. In this generate content, I'm going to specify the model, which in this case, we're looking for 2.5 flash. Let me grab that there. Now, once I send this request to 2.5 flash, or once I'm attached to that model, I can add contents. In this case, I have two separate contents. One of them will be describe the picture I've provided in 2 sentences. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and state in GenAI.types, I have a part. The part comes from bytes. And I'm going to send in the data or image bytes along with the MIME type of application dash JPEG. All right. Now, in this case, the picture is a PNG, so maybe this will cause some issues, but let's try this out and see what it does. I'm just going to print response.text. I run Python multimodal. Of course, I can't spell Python. It's going to send the requests. Okay, so we did get some issues here. So MIME type, JPEG, status, invalid argument. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Okay. The model is good. Contents are good. Nope, the issues with the contents. Okay, so client error. Generate client error, 400 invalid arguments, error code 400 message, unsupported MIME type application JPEG. Status invalid. Interesting. Let's see. MIME type takes in a string. Why not? Uh, okay, this may not be liking it. It could be a problem with the curriculum. So let me check the documentation here. Let's see. In the documentation, we have images, we have structured output. So those are guides for media resolution. I think what we're looking for is text. let's see here. Text, multimodal input. All right, so here we can see this PIL image. That image is opening the path. I think this PIL is pillow, but let me check here. Image understanding guide. Yeah, so it's where does this come from? Yep, it is pillow. So let's go ahead and dive into pillow. I wonder if this will give me some installation, basic installation, upgrade pillow. Okay, this should be everything that we need here for our pip. Let's go ahead and pass that in. Okay, that gives me pillow. I can go back to my multimodal. And in here I can state from PIL. I want to import image. According to the documentation of what I'm seeing here, what we need is image.open. So here I can make my image be image.open, where I can specify the picture path. And instead of doing all of this information here, I could just pass in the image as my argument. And I'm actually going to switch these. I'm going to pass it first, just so that it replicates what we see there on the documentation. Okay, so we can pass in multimodal. Now it's actually thinking. Hopefully it doesn't return an error again. Okay, so this image displays Pikachu, the iconic yellow Pokemon standing in a vibrant green glass landscape. Pikachu is shown with a slightly somber or thoughtful expression looking towards the left, with its distinctive lightning bolt-shaped tail curving upwards on the right side of the frame. Well, if we take a look at our picture, it pretty much did a fantastic job at describing everything that we need to do. Now, in the Google documentation, and I do want to point this out because one of our assignments today will require us to make an image. In our Google documentation, if we come down to media, or excuse me, if we go to images, here you'll see image generation. And this will walk you through the process of how to actually grab an image generation and how this process actually works. Right. So again, we didn't cover this in class, but we did cover how to explore the documentation. So it will be up to you to read the documentation and complete the assignment for this afternoon. All right. Now, with that said, before I start going into the review, does anyone have any questions over how we handle multimodal prompts? And again, multimodal prompts just means that we're handling two different types of data. We're not just handling text, we're also handling an image in this prompt. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have any questions. So let's dive into our review. In part two of our lecture, we covered its structured outputs with Pydantic, implementing a configuration, how we can actually handle chats to maintain context across multiple messages. We then went into multimodal with both image and description and thinking mode, and the benefits of thinking mode to help us debug what could possibly be wrong with our prompt, if our prompt is too descriptive or not descriptive enough. At this point, does anyone have any questions over any of the material that we covered during part two of our lecture? All right, it doesn't seem like we have any questions. I do want to point out to everybody, I ran into issues during today's lecture. Like I said, all of this is constantly being updated. So there's a perfect example of things that are actively happening, right? This curriculum was made about a couple of months ago, and it's already starting to run into some dating issues. So please keep that in mind whenever you're working through assignments or you're reading the curriculum. There's a good chance that some of this stuff changes. So always utilize the documentation as pretty much our Bible for this development process. All right. Any questions for me? Perfect. Let me go ahead and stop our recording here.